Well, hello, Pastor Rich here again, and I'm here in this moment to bring you the Sunday sermon. Today's reading comes to us from John chapter 11, verses 1 to 44. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick, so the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, "Lord, your dear friend is very sick." But when Jesus heard about it, he said, "Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this." So although he loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, Jesus stayed there for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." But his disciples objected. "Rabbi," they said, "only a few days ago the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again?" Jesus replied, "There are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. Then they can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there is danger of stumbling because they have no light." Then he said, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up." The disciples said, "Lord, if he's sleeping, he'll soon get better." They thought Jesus had meant that Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant that Lazarus had died. So he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes I'm glad that I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him." Thomas, nicknamed the Twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let's go too and die with Jesus." When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "he will rise when everyone else rises, at the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life, and whoever believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I've always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." Then she returned to Mary. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, "The teacher is here and wants to see you." So Mary immediately went to Jesus. Jesus had stayed outside of the village at the place where Martha met him. When the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep. So they followed her there. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. "Where have you put him?" Jesus asked them. They told him, "Lord, come and see." Then Jesus wept. The people who were standing nearby said, "See how much he loved him." But some said, "This man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" Jesus was angry, and as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. "Roll the stone aside," Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, "Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible." Jesus responded, "Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe?" So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. But I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe that you sent me." Then Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave cloths, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him go." This ends our reading. Now, in considering the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, this is one of the very profound miracles that show up in the Gospel according to John, and it's worth taking a look at. Now, when we look at this story, often our eyes are so focused on what Jesus is doing, our attention is so focused on what Jesus is doing that we may miss out on what's happening in the lives of some of the other characters in the story. And so I'd like to take a quick look at three individuals that are part of this story and their perception of what Jesus is capable of. We have Thomas, Martha, and Mary. All right, so we're going to take a look at each of them. Now, Thomas, one of the disciples of Jesus, of course, he was traveling along with Jesus with the other disciples. And note that when Jesus says that they're going back to Judea to go because Lazarus had died, I mean, Jesus had said, well, I'm going to wake him up. But it seems that Thomas misunderstood what Jesus was saying, because Thomas says to his other disciples then, let's go and die with Jesus too. Thomas knew of the social and political opposition that Jesus had from the Jewish leaders at that time. And so it seems that he thought that Jesus meant that they would all be killed and that they would be with Lazarus in heaven. That's how he made sense of Jesus saying, well, I'm going to go and wake him up. Martha, of course, one of Lazarus' sisters, and a close friend of Jesus, it seems. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are described as close friends of Jesus. So Martha knew that her brother Lazarus was dead, and that Lazarus would be raised at the resurrection of the dead, which she looked forward to in the future. Okay? Now, Mary, Martha's sister, knew that if Jesus were there 4 days prior, that he would have been able to heal Lazarus and keep him from dying. Each of these three characters, Thomas, Martha, and Mary, had this in common. Each of them judged the situation and the setting correctly. The Jewish leaders would eventually have Jesus arrested and killed. And so that social and political opposition that Thomas was so acutely aware of was a correct judgment of the setting and the situation. Now, the resurrection of the dead is the great hope for all. And Martha, in acknowledging the great hope for all of them, judges the setting and the situation in a correct manner as well. Jesus had shown many times that he had the power to heal. And so Mary's reflection of, Lord, if you had been here 4 days prior, you would have been able to heal Lazarus. That too is a correct judgment of the situation and the setting. But they also had this in common, Thomas, Mary, and Martha. Their understanding of Jesus was too small. Each of them saw Jesus as somehow limited by social and political tensions of the day, limited by time, and limited by the finality of death. But as the personal embodiment of the source of divine creativity, Jesus responded to the death of Lazarus in such a way that clearly shows that Jesus possesses no such limitations. Recall that Jesus spoke these words to Martha. He says, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus approached that tomb where Lazarus had been buried. He had the stone rolled away. He offered a prayer and shouted, "Lazarus, come out!" When the crowd, which included Thomas, Martha, and Mary, saw Jesus responding to the situation in such a way that exceeded all of their expectations, they were amazed. Now, when our perceived limitations say that there is no way, with Jesus, there's always a way. And so I would ask, what, in a moment of personal reflection, for me, for you, for all of us, what limitations might we place upon Jesus in our minds, given the current coronavirus pandemic? Limitations on what God can do with regard to our health, our finances, our jobs, other things. Recall that in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 18, verse 27, Jesus affirms and shares with his disciples, what is impossible for people is possible with God. And so, in light of the current situation in which we find ourselves, what can we do? What can we do? Well, for one thing, we can pray. We can pray for wisdom for our leaders. We can pray for good health for our neighbors. We can pray for protection for those who must continue to work, especially for healthcare professionals. We can pray that God's healing presence would find expression through them. We can stay connected, and while honoring the social distancing protocol as much as possible, reach out a helping hand to those stuck at home who are most vulnerable to infection. We can trust that as Jesus exceeded Thomas, Martha, and Mary's expectations, that Jesus will make a way towards healing and wholeness for this whole world at such a time as this. We all need a bigger Jesus who exceeds all of the limitations that we place upon God in our minds. Thank God we have one. And so let us resolve to place our trust in him today. Amen.